Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Accuracy in America. My name is Don Irvine. I'm joined today once again by Brian McNichol.
Good morning. Hello, deplorables, drags, despicables, chumps, Neanderthals, and dog-faced pony soldiers.
That's right. All right. Plenty of news out there. We're on a different day again, just adjusting to my schedule, and our viewers will just have to follow us as we move along during the summer and whatever, and all of that. So Joe Biden and Jill Biden, President and First Lady, are in England, and there's a G7 meeting coming up in Cornwall, I guess it is.
Right.
So he's out there and doing that. He's already had some time with Boris Johnson out there, and I saw that Boris had said that Biden is a breath of fresh air. So explain to me
everything away. I'm sure they very much like Biden over there because, he's an easy mark. And he's like, one of the first things they've done is they want to join this international tax cartel and say that taxes can't go below a certain amount and so forth. So we're not in tax competition with other countries. We absolutely should be in tax competition in other countries. We should. You lower taxes, you attract businesses, which provide jobs, hold down costs. We're building stuff in America. We're building up America. But instead, the Bidens think that it is a genius to rejoin all these world consortiums whose attitude is America has more to spend on making all this right than any of the rest of us, so we'll just let them do it. It's a catastrophic trip. He needs to get home and stop talking as quickly as he can.
You just made an interesting point, though. I mean, in terms of Biden rejoining these things, if you think about it or just look at a list, I mean, he has wasted no time in basically, everything that Trump did in terms of leaving, accords and whatnot and trying to carve a path for the U.S. Biden has gone back and said, no, we're doing this, which, I saw. So the gym, I have to get them to change this, but they keep messing with the televisions over there. And now that one of the closest televisions plays MSNBC on the morning, which may not be a bad thing as long as I can contrast it with Fox. But, they've got this report talking about how the world, opinion of the U.S. has gone up under Biden, right? But I think that goes to your point where you're saying it's like, well, Biden he's basically giving everything away. So, yeah, why wouldn't the world
leaders? An all-day sucker. I mean, of course, we can go back to taking advantage of the United States again. I noticed that one of the things that Boris said that he liked about Biden was what he said about NATO, right? Well, what did Trump say about NATO? That, if you promise to spend 2% of your budget on GDP, then, we want you to keep that promise, right? Because it costs us if you don't keep that promise. And, Biden's right back to, we're not really going to make you keep that promise. Of course they like that. Of course that's better, right? They can do whatever they want and they don't have to honor the things they agreed to do.
Right. Now, what was it?
I can tell you, man, this is a catastrophe of a presidency. It's, we will, the task is going to be to make it to the end of it with the country still intact. These people this is awful.
Yeah, well, I mean, from the agenda is definitely far progressive left, worse than I think a lot of people had, thought it was ever going to be. But
virulently anti-American.
Yeah. Now, on this tax situation, Biden proposed a higher global tax, right? I mean, and I think they're at about 15% right now is what I think they seem to have agreed with these major countries. Now, they're not. I don't know how they're going to sell it to the rest of the world, in essence, But they're going after these corporations, and I think you make a really good point here. Though, it's like, why do they have to level things off and level the playing field that way? Why not make America more competitive?
Yeah, I mean, and he has Yellen on there, Janet Yellen, like saying, "Hey, this is a good idea. We can't have this race to the bottom on tax rates. Like, absolutely, we can have that race to the bottom because it builds our economy. And the countries that are interested in getting these corporations to come there and operate, they should be able to lower taxes to attract them. What is wrong with that? How can that be a bad thing?"
Yeah, I mean, Ireland is going to. I mean, I think they're going to have a problem with this because is
Yeah,
that they have been below in general, and they have been able
right.
to attract major corporations as a result. They know what will happen is that if they have to jack theirs up, they will potentially lose out, to
Yeah.
other places.
I mean, that's their edge. That's like the main thing that makes Ireland an attractive place for this. And so you're telling them, you're to forfeit your main asset in the interest of some, unity created by, Davos attending financiers who definitely don't have the interest of consumers at heart. Like, you got to be kidding me. I mean, it's like they are deliberately trying to find every mistake in the book and make it in spades.
Right. I mean, and I think Trump showed, what happens when you change tax policy and make it more favorable because, he lowered the tax rates and corporations repatriated a ton of money they've been holding on to
That's
overseas,
right.
which is what we want. You raise these tax rates, they'll find another way. They won't bring that money back here.
That's
They'll
right.
find, they'll go
You're
somewhere.
telling them go back over, Burger King, go sell yourself to a Canadian company again. Go do those things. Get that corporate headquarters out of the US because we're going to hammer it, to pay for woke education or whatever. I
Yeah.
mean, it's just nuts. It's like they completely don't get how things work. Like not one of them understands civics or economics.
Yeah, I don't understand what the thinking here is on this, except that that general liberal Democrat socialist whatever you want to call it, feeling that big corporations are bad, they don't pay enough taxes, so therefore we have to do this, and we want everybody to pay the same no matter where they are. But there's no consideration about American competitiveness. I mean, we've been talking. I mean, conservatives at least have been talking about American competitiveness and things like this for decades, and tax policy drives a lot of this. And the Democrats seem to be either tone deaf on this, or they're just so the tunnel vision about corporations is such that we have to do this because this is the only way to get them to pay their fair share. But they have no understanding of how a corporation runs.
Yeah, and what is this their fair share? Why is their fair share? I mean, if corporations are people, why is there a corporate tax at all? Right? Just tax them when they make their money, like we do everyone else. The
Yeah,
whole
no,
thing is ridiculous, and we definitely, there's definitely, I mean, there's a straight line progression from lower corporate taxes to bigger economic growth, right? So, why can't people see that? Why is there? Is that the grab bag? They're always, because they don't really care about growth, right? They don't really care about expanding opportunity. They're like, maintain, make people comfortable in low standards of living. That's really what they're about, right? It's like, we're going to make it where it's okay to be poor, and like it's comfortable to be poor. So, that sounds good, but like, why would you stop being poor? Why would you do the things that get out of being poor if you don't really gain anything out of it? Right.
Right. Well, and I meant to look this story up, so I'm going to throw this out at you. You may or may not have seen this. I was told last night that West Virginia, is proposing to basically have no state income tax, and if that's true, I mean that would join a number of other states that have no state income tax. Now, one of the challenges in West Virginia is that they've been losing population. They're going to lose. They're losing their right, and so this is a way for them to attract people into their state by saying, hey, we're not going to have a state income tax. Now, I also need to couch these,
And also, I just want to say,
kind of like that. And
it attracts people who are interested in making money, right? I mean, if you're just going to be work at the chicken shack, doesn't matter, right? But if you're someone who's interested in doing entrepreneurial things, then it's a big advantage.
Right. And I think we've seen that in large, the states that don't have state income taxes have attracted certain groups of people, as a result of that.
Right.
Now they're, I don't, they're not necessarily the most overall tax friendly states because you've got to think about property taxes and sales taxes and things like that. But for a lot of individuals, no state income tax is a huge deal. I'll be very curious if they actually get it through, because if you cut that out, you're going to make it up somewhere, but you have to make up the whole nut. I always think that, with these states too, is this, the governments, is that you can learn to live with less. The liberal Democrats, are always on that tax and spend binge, that we need the tax revenues because we got to spend it. But a real fiscally responsible state government doesn't have to spend all the tax money.
Right.
They can then lower the taxes. They can give people the benefits, and everybody will be fine. I mean, I live in Montgomery County. You know what I face in Montgomery County with taxes in Maryland. This is ridiculous.
Right. The other thing is, okay, you raise example of Montgomery County. Okay, so in Maryland, your county taxes are based on your state taxes, right? So
right.
If you have no state income tax, that lowers the county tax. That impinges on local government's ability to collect tax revenue, which is another advantage of eliminating the state income tax. Yeah.
No, I mean, I had a guy. We were doing this other show thing, last night, and one of the other guys. He's not really political. At all, and so he doesn't know all the details of tax policy. But I don't think he was really, and I think he lives in Howard County, and he wasn't really familiar with, hasn't thought really through on terms of how tax policy is in Maryland. But if you're a Maryland taxpayer, when you get there, you have to tell them what jurisdiction you live in, because most of the jurisdictions in Maryland have basically a surcharge of about 50%. Maybe some might be at 40 or 45, but most of them are around 50%. So you think this is your Maryland state tax, liability. Oh yeah, wait a minute. There's another piggyback charge to cover the local government's part of that too, and that can be substantial. And this is a fight that's been going on for time, but it continues to choke us in Montgomery County.
That's right. You cannot grow in Montgomery County because of it.
All right. So Bob has come in here. Discouraging but unsurprising start to the first presidential trip abroad for Joe Biden, with emphasis on global minimum tax and climate change, rather than the far more significant security challenges posed by China and Russia globally, and Iran and North Korea regionally. So that's right.
That's right. So
what he's saying there too. Yeah. That's right. I mean, I'm glad that, Bob, that you brought up the climate change too, because that's the other thing. Because what has Biden said, that climate change is what the greatest threat to our democracy, or something to that effect. I mean, what is that?
Yeah, it's just slavishly devoted to, expounding on climate change all over the place and so forth. It's like there's no resemblance to reality, right? And Bob's exactly right. The problem at the end of the day is the deep and abiding unseriousness of these people. Like, the first lady goes out of her way to wear a jacket that says love or I love you or something on it, because, Melania is not totally in her head. And, she just wanted to be her own self and communicate this message or whatever. And the Trumps are totally not in their head. That I mentioned that the Trumps are not totally in their head, but I mean, it's like you're thinking about, what's on the back of your coat, and climate change and global minimums, so we can cooperate with France and UK, who've ruined their economies with bad tax policy, because we want to make sure we're in sync with them, right? I mean, it's pathetic. And it's like the serious issues, right? We've had, Russians have hacked the meat supply, the transportation network, and the fuel network in the last 2 months. But let's don't worry about that. Let's worry about, whether coral reefs are browning in the South Pacific, I mean, it's like, get serious. You have a serious job here, and it's time to quit clowning around with this stuff.
What always gets me, about this, particularly about this climate change, when you're talking about Europe in particular and these other countries like that, is just that, they're all racing, and the U.S., the car manufacturers in the U.S. are racing this way, and a lot of corporations are trying to race to all this, embracing, really totally now fully embracing, green energy, the wind, solar, biofuels, everything that under that rubric. But they really haven't addressed the infrastructure required to get there, and exactly how they plan to do this. What is the cost of that infrastructure? I mean, if you want to build a solar farm, where are you going to build it? I mean, I just had this conversation with my son Spencer who lives in Arizona, and there's a big fight that was highlighted by the Wall Street Journal in the last few days, within the last week or so. And so there's a company that wants to build a huge solar farm on what's called the Mormon Mesa out there, and the environmentalists are pushing back. The gist of the Wall Street Journal article really was that, their environmentalists are pushing back on some of these green energy projects because they're like, wait a minute, you can't touch that land. Well, they're like, right, but we're only going to be occupying this portion of this whole thing. It's kind of like the drilling in Anwar that we've discussed. It's the size of South Carolina. It's a blip on the radar screen of the space of the land. But if you want,
the size of Dulles Airport in a park, the size of South Carolina.
Yeah, it's a small, and so they're taking this piece, they're taking a piece of land that no one's really utilizing anyway, and trying to do this and generate this energy. But now the environmentalists said, no, you can't. Here's part of the policy: is that you can have, we want wind energy, we want solar, farms on the coast, but you can't touch these areas. Well, right. Guess what?
You don't want to make room for it, and in solar. The drawback of solar is it takes a lot of room, right? The panels, each individually, are not really productive. So you have to have a ton of panels over a large area to create any kind of meaningful power to make it worthwhile. And so, you're not just asking for an acre or two here. You're asking for hundreds and thousands of acres of land to do this on. And if you can't do it out in the desert in Arizona, I don't know where you can do it.
Right, because we've talked. I mean, you mentioned how where I live is generally a very cloudy area. I mean, there's a lot of overcast days. So even me with my solar panels, I can only generate a teeny fraction of energy to offset my electricity costs, right? And this is and if you think about Europe, I mean, that's a tiny area in general. I mean, there's limited amount of land that hasn't been developed. What are you going to do with that? And there's a lot of bad weather in Europe,
right?
It's like,
you don't have the land.
Does very well.
So they're not practical. The underlying message is they're not practical solutions. We don't have this problem close to solve, and we're not even concerned. I'm not convinced it's a problem we ought to be spending a whole lot of time working on. I guess. What is the guy's name? Bjorn Lomborg, right. Swedish. He's an economist and so forth. He looks at this stuff, and his point, people will say he doesn't believe in global warming. No, he says he does. He's actually pretty strongly does believe the Earth is warming. I'm not sure the data supports that anymore, but that's what he believes. But what he's saying is, if you line up all the problems that the Earth faces, global warming is way down the list. He has it somewhere in the 80s, I think. Right. So he's like, okay, let's spend on it, the same as we do on any of these other projects that are the 80th most important thing we have to deal with. Right. Because that's about where it is. But instead, for political reasons, it's being elevated to our top geopolitical concern. That's lunacy. That's just asking, please punch me. Please take advantage of me.
That's right. Well, I mean, and then the solar thing. I mean, the other thing the wind energy thing. The other thing that came up too was just like the birds, right? You start putting up more windmills and whatnot. It's like, but there are migratory bird patterns. There's all kinds of things. We already know a lot of birds get killed by those darn things. You put up more, that will increase that. And that has people. The other thing is, we're
going to be dependent on it, right? If you're going to say, hey, we want to be dependent on wind energy. Okay, wind energy, the wind turbines require rare earth metals that we don't really mine in the United States. And the reason we don't mine them in the United States is because it's very bad for the environment to mine them. Right? The mines themselves are terrible, environmentally terrible, cause cancer, pollute water, can't use the water supply. I mean, just really bad pollution. Okay. So we get them from China. So if we become dependent on them and China decides to pull the plug, what will we do? How will we handle that? Because we're not really set up to do it. And frankly, a lot of that stuff, we don't really have the amounts of it in the United States that we would need to compete.
Right.
We are dependent on them for a product we really don't need.
Right. I mean, China has vast resources, and that's been talked about for a long time. But you're right. I mean, the conditions, the mining rare earth metals is absolutely horrible. I mean, people,
Yeah.
it's just, these are some of the worst working conditions you will ever see on this earth are when you're mining that material. So
Yeah.
it's, but the environmentalists, that's not this is also that disconnect with them, right? Green energy, all this stuff, but they will completely ignore what happens, how to get the materials you need to do this, right?
Or the dangers of clear cutting all that land, and
right.
I mean,
right. I mean, hypocrisy for them is just uncool, about this. Yeah, it's just one of those things I had to bring up because it really kind of just drives me nuts. Jill Biden. I don't know. I mean, I'm kind of curious as they start traveling the world as to what other little things that Jill will be doing and how much more space in her head, will have going forward.
Yeah, she obviously has some problems. You just kind of hope you don't get too embarrassed before it's all over.
And I think I saw this story. Trump was trolling Putin when they're going to meet with Biden. He says, don't fall asleep and all these other things. Yeah. So, I'll give the former president, some credit here for also that
that was a great troll. He said, don't fall asleep and pay attention.
All right. I want to bring up this whole thing because once again, to me, this is another example of liberal hypocrisy, which is, Representative Byron Donalds in Florida. He's there. He's a black Republican. He's a Trump supporter. He's a conservative guy. He wants to be, just like a lot of other Republicans have tried in the past, to join the Congressional Black Caucus. And, basically they barred the doors like they have in the past. I just want to say, if you want to call it a Congressional Black Democratic Caucus or whatever, then you understand this is all full of Democrats, and we're going to be, and then the Republicans could do their own thing or whatever. But they seem to me always to say we are representing black legislators that are in the U.S. Congress, but they keep excluding the conservatives.
Well, I mean, what do they really say? Because what is the point of a Congressional Black Caucus? So take them at their benefit of the doubt. What is it you're trying to accomplish with a group like that? Right, to understand the issues of that face black people that don't face others, I guess, right? I mean, that's a reasonable expectation, right? We will talk about these things together, share experiences, find ways to move forward, right? As black people speaking for black people, in the Congress. Okay. So, a few years ago, Steve Cohen tried to join, right? I don't know if you remember that. Steve Cohen's a congressman from Memphis, Democrat, a very liberal Democrat who almost his entire district is black. So, they're like, well, no, you're not black. Okay. This guy, he's black, but, you're not doctrinaire leftist, right? So, do these people have nothing to contribute to, like, what are the problems of Black America that Congress could solve? I mean, their voice isn't important, or are we just saying that we're going to, champion certain ideas and not champion others? Because that's what it looks like to me, is that, you're in the caucus so long as you nod and salute to the proper ideas. It's kind of sad.
Yeah. I'm trying to. I thought you were talking. You kind of stirred something. I thought, well, maybe there's like on the CBC website, like just kind of their mission statement front and center. But they put press releases, and a welcome message and stuff like that, and a few other things, like in some tweets and whatnot. But it's interesting, actually on the face of it on the website, they actually don't post a message per se that says, what do we stand for, right off the bat. So, which makes it kind of nebulous a little bit in terms of, exactly what is the purpose of that Black Caucus, as you had said at the beginning. That is, it's questionable. That's I forgot about that Cohen thing because, look, if you represent, if you've got a lot of blacks in your district and you want to understand those issues, if in theory, join the Congressional Black Caucus so you can better understand those issues and maybe better meet your needs. And as you said, I mean, the guy's a liberal Democrat. he fits right in with them ideologically. He's not a threat to them, but because of the color of his skin. And so this also gets to this, to me, part of the whole thing about the color of one's skin, racism. Is this not some kind of a racist type of a thing now? How discriminatory are they? In the particularly
does this help us become less racist as a society?
Right.
To have these kind of things. When you're sorry, this is kind of going on a lot of people, a lot of places now where you have a situation of resegregation. You have colleges, Black students saying we want our own dorms. Like, okay, years ago you wanted out of your own dorms, right? You didn't want your own dorms, right? So we changed all that, and now it's like, your own dorms is what you want, So it's like, is that moving us closer together? Is that the goal now? Is that still the goal of so-called Black leadership? Al Sharpton, are you trying to join us together or pull us apart? Because I think it's coming down to some questions on this and other issues where you kind of have to choose, right?
Right. Yeah. No doubt about it. I mean, in an era now, or at least this time where we're talking about, or there's a lot of talk about all this social justice, racial justice, equality, and all these things. What's the purpose of the Congressional Black Caucus? I mean, how do they help this issue? How do they unite Americans versus dividing? Your example of separate dorms. When I first saw that, I'm like, what are we talking about here? Or what happened to all our decades of trying to integrate everybody? Now you're trying to segregate everybody out again.
Right.
How does this serve any useful purpose?
So I mean, I don't know that, and I think it's time to have that conversation. It's like, how much, if the goal is to get rid of racism and us all live as one country and everyone be looked at equally. If we can share that we can agree that that's the goal, then it seems like we got a lot of stuff here that doesn't serve the goal that we're going to have to think about whether it belongs anymore.
Yeah, I mean, we went through, our country went through a period of having all this segregation of where, Blacks weren't allowed into certain places, they had to sit in the back of the bus, all these kinds of things that we know very well. And yet now, what goes through my head is just like, oh yeah, the Black dorm, that's over there, or whatever. I mean, is that, have we not taken, many steps backwards on this? And then what, so, I mean, and your example of Steve Cohen and the Congressional Black Caucus, what if you're a white student that, wants to be with other Black students, but your color of your skin now, will that color of your skin now prevent you from being with Black students in a dorm and because you could right now you could have a Black roommate, right? I mean, a lot of things are random draws and whatnot, but what is that? How do the kids get to know other cultures and other things if they're segregated like this? Like, this makes no sense to me.
Because what really happened in the United States on racism is we started working and going to school with people of other races. And when you work with someone, I mean, you've been working a long time, as have I, right? I mean, it's not whether they're Black or white; it's whether they do the work, right? Do they hustle? Do they, work hard at it, or do they slack off and leave it for you? I mean, so you really start to see, character in a whole new light, right? Because it doesn't have anything to do with this ephemeral stuff where you go to church or what color your skin is, what kind of car you drive, or anything like that, right? It's like, what do you do? And we have 2 hours more work to do, and we only have 1 hour to do it. Do you roll up your sleeves with me and get after it and get it done, or do you slack off? Right? That's how you tell people. And you walk out of those jobs and you're friends with all kinds of people from all kinds of walks of life because they happened to work there when you did, and you got to see their character up close and see them actually do what they're supposed to do. Right.
I mean, if those are the ways you help train and teach and become a colorblind society, and the steps that are being taken here are doing exactly the opposite. It's like I don't see, I don't judge a person by the color of their skin. And we shouldn't be doing that. I want competent. If I'm hiring somebody or whatever, I just want competent people.
Right, and
let them
they're
do their
moving the
job.
goalposts. They don't want this to work. They don't want us to get together, right? Because if we get together, then a whole lot of nonsense is going to get looked at a lot closer and eliminated, right? On nonsense and how the schools deal with this. Who really is, inconvenienced unnecessarily to vote. What would we really need to do to make voting available, and so forth. Who are there people being sidelined? We'd really take a look at that. We'd really look if we were all together, right? But as long as we're apart, hating each other, things like that won't happen. They can't happen.
All right. And Bob comments on this segment here. He says, I am left to wonder how segregating students based on identity, however characterized, contributes to expanding the diversity the left pushes so hard for, right? I mean, right. It's a lie right in the face of their argument of what they're trying to achieve.
Right, because they're not really after what they say they're after.
Right. All right. TC Pipeline, XL Pipeline, the TC, what is it called? TC Energy has announced their whole. They're pulling out. That it's done for them at this point in time. I mean, not necessarily unsurprising, but just another reminder of to I think both of us agree, a real bonehead decision by Biden of canceling the permits on the XL Keystone pipeline thing, and how much it'll affect energy policy down the line and all the jobs and everything else that go with it.
Well, first of all, I read on that one and try to figure out what they meant by giving up and abandoning the project. And it appears they're trying to keep the right of way. They're trying to maintain the relationships with the state regulators along the path of the pipeline and so forth. So I would characterize this as more hibernation than elimination. And when you get a friendly administration back in power to appeal again. So, I could see, it being magically resurrected, should Trump or DeSantis or somebody win like that win in 2024.
Yeah, I mean, I tend to agree with it. I think they're doing whatever they feel that they need to do publicly. Privately, there's been so much money invested in this thing. They're not going to be willing to totally say give up and walk away and just throw away the keys or whatever.
Right.
They're going to watch that. I mean, they're going to cross their fingers in hopes that this is a one-term Democrat control of the White House and Congress and everything. In this case, that that the Republicans will retake the Congress in 2022, maybe take control of the Senate in 2022, and then take control of the White House in 2024. At which point, probably look up and then they can restart the thing. But that means they're going to have keep an eye on the pipeline because stuff deteriorates, right? I mean, you have to do certain maintenance issues and things like that and stuff. Equipment will deteriorate. So they'll probably have to do some investment along the way. They just won't have tens of thousands of people working for them, for the next few years while they wait this out. Now,
and they have to protect the three other pipelines that the Biden administration has been pressured to close as well.
Right.
So, there's they got a lot of work.
What happens if, heaven forbid, that the Democrats, maintain control of the White House for 8 years? What would that do to the pipeline at that point?
Or energy production in general,
Yeah,
we better have our renewable act together by the end of that 8 years because we won't have any oil and gas.
Right, exactly. It's like, by the way, in the meantime, we basically decided that we're not going to work on the fossil fuel thing. So you better be ready to hit the ground running there in 8 years, going forward with this. This is a question I wanted to ask you before because we knew this was a developing story, which is on Netanyahu. He has survived remarkably. He is quite the politician. Amazing.
He really is.
We've had 4 elections, I guess, in Israel up to now, something like that, and he has maintained control, of his job, despite the fact that he has, he's had to cobble together these coalitions. there's a vote that's supposed to take place by June 14th, which is Monday, I think it is.
Right.
And that there's a coalition that is supposedly ready, that has enough votes to basically push Netanyahu out. Now, there's still time that could totally unravel, and they'll have to go to a fifth election. But what would happen? I mean, if Netanyahu actually loses his position, his power, I mean, what do you think happens to Israel? Do things change much?
My understanding is the most likely person to take over, should this coalition be able to be formed, there's a lot of questions about whether they will, and reports of Netanyahu's political demise have emanated on a pretty much regular basis over the last 15 years, and he's still standing. So, as you say, you got to wait. You got to wait till he's certainly dead before you declare him dead politically. But the guy who wants to take his place, who's poised to take his place, worked for him, and they had a disagreement over something. So I'm not sure that, from a policy standpoint, Israel will change a whole lot. He appears to be sort of ideologically in pretty much the same place with regard to the Palestinian problem and Hamas and so forth. I mean, the facts on the ground in Israel, they're lobbing shells at you. You have to protect and respond to that. You can't just say it's okay to lob shells. There's no energy now, and I don't think there will be for a considerable period of time, really behind a two-state solution. Outside of John Kerry, everyone else has kind of recognized that, these guys, they're not interested in a deal. The only deal that they're interested in would be, the end of Israel, right? Because they can't agree to Israel has the right to exist, right? It's not in their, it's fundamentally impossible for them. So they can't really be partners in a deal. And I think that, outside of the, Rashida Tlaibs of the world, you don't have that. There's no consensus for, beating everybody about the head to go sit at the negotiating table and work on a two-state solution. That's never going to happen. So I don't see, from our standpoint, the things that matter to us, I don't see it changing a whole lot.
Yeah, I mean, what'll be interesting is that if they somehow manage a way to oust Netanyahu, and they have this thing, my understanding too was that on how they were going to do this was that it was kind of a power sharing arrangement where one guy would serve for like 6 months and then they flip it over, which to me seems, I don't know how that's going to work. That just make government extremely unstable. That's not, on paper you can say that, but in reality that's really not very workable.
Right. Parliamentary system, you can't do that. Somebody's got to stand up and be the head of it for a while.
Right. Yeah. That's just like, I'm only in for 6 months, and then when they get to their fifth month, I'm like, well, I'm going to be out of here in a month. So what do I just?
Right. And why would anybody listen to you in any of those months? Right. Why would anybody do what you said? You're basically you're on day one. You're a lame duck, right?
Exactly. That's exactly what I was going to say. You are a lame duck. So this creates that's just ridiculous and everything. So that's what
you get in these parliamentary systems where you don't have a strong executive, right? You can end up in these rat holes where the strength of the executive lies in him personally, right? So it's not that Netanyahu has constitutional power. It's that he has amassed personal power, right? So you're still, it's still great man theory and all that kind of stuff. So, it shows a weakness of, people want that here, multi-parties, the two-party system killing us, this and that. This is what happens when you go that route, right? People should understand that, you lose some things when you go to that kind of system.
Exactly. All right. So that leads me into this whole dust up with Ilhan Omar and her tweet and everything like this, where she basically compared, Israel and the U.S. to Hamas and the Taliban. Now she tried to walk that back. There were about a dozen Democrats in Congress that chastised her for that. Nancy Pelosi, I guess they came up with a statement to try to smooth that over a little bit. But this. I don't believe Ilhan Omar one bit about what she was really, what I say her explanation on this. We know who she is. We know what she stands for.
Yeah, she had a starkly similar explanation for when she said some people did some things on 9/11 too, right? It was a similar. Oh, you don't understand. You weren't there. You didn't hear my whole conversation. Yeah, we understand fully, right? You know, you hate America. You hate the Jews. You're virulently anti-Semitic. So there were two letters. One of them was from leadership. Democrat leadership in the House, Pelosi, Steny, Clyburn, and a few others. And one of them was from a group of Jewish Democrat lawmakers, which was pretty harsh on her. You know, and she denies doing anything wrong and so forth. But, you know, the interesting part about this is, like, you know, Democrats are realizing that they're being tied to pretty virulent anti-Semitic messages, and it's not consistent with who they say they are, for one thing, right? You know, it's like some prejudice is okay and some is not, right? And it's frankly a lot of their voters and donors, you know. So, you know, you're seeing like the back end of the party start to single this out and talk about it, because you know, it hurts. There are people, you know, members of Congress who are directly hurt by this. It makes them harder to win their elections. You know, the other thing is, you know, like Tlaib, and I think she came out with a statement saying, you know, we're getting tired of tone police by leadership, getting our tone policed all the time by leadership. You know, where's our voice? Why can't we say what we want to say? So, you know, you have a situation now where you have a pretty significant sort of party infighting situation here over, you know, one member's, you know, persistence in making, you know, virulently, blatantly anti-Semitic remarks.
Right. I mean, the Democrats have got, you know, I mean, Nancy Pelosi, they've got to figure out, that leadership's got to figure out what they do with this squad type mentality. I mean, because they're noisy. I mean, you know, they go out and they tweet, they're noisy and they say what, and then they have these little fights, but it is showing a real schism, you know, a real problem within the party in terms of these policy things. And, you know, it's still, you know, it's still just, to me, it's like, you know, I understand Omar doesn't like, you know, Israel. She doesn't like, you know, the US and the policies and stuff like that. But it's like, you know, we both have talked about this, you know, this last skirmish. It was Hamas that started lobbing the missiles over. I mean, you know, Israel didn't start this thing.
It didn't start it. It would have never happened without Hamas. And why did Hamas do it? They just got a big infusion of cash. From where? Where'd they get that infusion of cash? Joe Biden. Right? It's like, oh, let's get back in the game with Iran and Hamas and the Palestinians and two-state solution and all those things that were, quote, neglected during the Trump administration. They weren't neglected at all. They were being attended to properly. And now we have gone back, you know, as is the case, a lot of policy areas, and, you know, insistent on remaking the same mistakes we were making before.
All right. So I got Bob chiming in here with some of his expertise. After researching, writing, and teaching myriad courses on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict over the past 2 decades, I see no reason whatsoever for optimism on any kind of resolution, one state, 2-state, or any formula in between. The closest any president has come to facilitating significant Israeli-Palestinian progress was Bill Clinton in 2000. Circumstances have grown progressively worse since. Right, Brian, your thoughts?
Well, I am not for a 2-state solution. So the fact that we're farther from a 2-state solution does not bother me. I don't think that's a practical way to solve this. And I don't think the Palestinians are ever going to agree to it, because they have to recognize that Israel has the right to exist in order to enter the agreement. So I think, you know, the whole shibboleth of, you know, we're going to sit here and, you know, and measure progress by, you know, how much is achieved on a 2-state solution is misguided. I think that, you know, we need to move on from that approach. I think Trump was right to do that with the Abraham Accords. And, you know, I guess you noticed that Biden is trying to change the name of the Abraham Accords so that Trump doesn't get all the credit, right? You know, and I think that we have to look at, you know, Kushner as one of the premier diplomats of his age. I mean, he pulled off stuff there and in Central America, Mexico, that no diplomat, you know, in the United States had done for decades. So I think it's time to recognize that reality too. That guy was pretty talented.
Yeah, I mean,
He's still alive. He's still talented, I suppose. But
I'm not overly optimistic that in my lifetime that we will see a real solution or an answer to this at all. But we've been dealing this for decades, and
but I do think if you get Iran out of the question, right? Because what this is a proxy war. Hamas is a proxy for Iran, right? And I think that's why you had the Abraham Accords, because all the players there recognize that the actual conflict only involves Iran and Israel. That really Israel didn't have conflicts with the other countries, so they were pretty easy to agree to these pacts. And I'm also told that they're making money hand over fist over there on tourism, going to each other's countries, right? Because these are places, they're close, they're great, like beach communities in some cases and whatnot, that they've never been allowed to travel to before.
Yeah, so we will wait and see. We'll have to see how much the influence of the Squad does to disrupt things. Any progress that would have been made could just be completely undone by the fact that those kind of nutcases, I'll call them, out there are just kind of disrupting the whole thing. Coming back, to other domestic issues. So infrastructure, Biden they're still kind of going back and forth, and apparently, I guess there is a bipartisan committee has proposed something. I mean, do you think that with this? I mean, it's about, is it 1 trillion or 1.2 trillion or something like that? I mean, do you think Biden is going to go along with this? And, does he still want the whole bigger package, or will he take something to get something through and get a victory, which he needs?
I think the pressure on him is to hold out and to make a green Democrat-looking infrastructure bill, whether it has Republican votes or not. What they're talking about now is breaking off as much of it as they can into things that can be done through reconciliation, budget reconciliation, so they only need 50 votes in the Senate, leave other matters, more contentious matters, you have to get to the 60 votes. That has some use to it. There's a lot of pressure on the administration from members and from Democrat members in both houses to go forward without Republican help and pass it all on reconciliation, jam it down their throats and so forth. I don't think there's the political momentum in the country to do that. I think, people are starting to look at these gigantic spending measures, and they see like the COVID money has not been spent. Republicans want to reprogram some of the COVID relief money for the infrastructure, right? And Democrats don't. Oh no, that was for COVID. It's like, well, we don't have the money. You're not using that money, and we could use it over here. No, we can't. We can't declare that one priority led to the other. But America does need an infrastructure deal. I think President Trump recognized that, although he could not get one over the finish line, or really even started in good measure toward the finish line. But it needs to be about infrastructure, right? You look at, I don't know if you've seen any of these videos from Memphis, right? But the I-40 bridge going into Memphis across the Mississippi River, there's a big abutment broken in the bridge, a big one of the steel support beams. It's like this, and it's going to take them months to get that fixed. And so you have huge traffic jams going in and out of Memphis now because, everything's forced down to one bridge of traffic. And, if you know anything about Memphis, a lot of people in Memphis live in Arkansas, living on the Arkansas side of the river. So that commute is going to be a problem for months. I mean, this could go on for the rest of the year. So, I mean, we need infrastructure. If I was Biden, I would say, let's do a bill that is hardcore infrastructure. You'd get a lot of Republican support. It would be extremely hard to oppose it. And then you say, okay, we're going to do another bill that does green energy and child care and so forth, and have your Democrat v. Republican argument. And the timing probably lines up for you, because if you win the argument, you probably win the midterms, right?
Right. Yeah. I mean, infrastructure. I mean, we've talked about what a problem it is. I mean, one of the, if the politicians would quit spending the tax money that goes into their transportation funds on other things, they might have been able, like for the Memphis thing, they might have been able to do some maintenance, along the way to keep this thing from deteriorating. Because, we keep coming to these issues time after time where bridges collapse or are about to collapse. A lot of this could have been prevented, had we put money into this along the way, rather than saying we build a bridge, we do minimal maintenance, we don't even really check for things. Next thing you know, the thing is ready to collapse, and now it's going to cost you, a ton of money to fix. But like, you didn't have to get there, and we have ignored infrastructure to a large degree. But yeah, put into real infrastructure, not a lot of this nonsense we've done. All right, 2 minutes.
2 minutes. So as I predicted years ago, we started having college football playoffs. I'm like, this is going to grow and grow and grow. They say, oh no, this will be the last time we change it. Now they've gone to 4 teams. Now they want to do 12 teams, right? The beauty of college football is that it is the only sport where the regular season actually matters. Every single game matters. If you lose in the late September, you're probably out of the national championship picture. So, your third game of the year in late September matters. It's got national, championship implications. Whereas, if you're going to let in 12 teams and all the conference champions, if that game in late September is not a conference game, which it might well not be, right? Because conference schedules are generally a little later in the year, it won't matter at all. You'll be playing games all over the board that don't matter at all, right? That don't depend on whether you get into the thing. Now, they do have a problem they need to solve. If you win Conference USA or the AAC or one of the non-Big Six conferences, how do we determine that you don't belong among the best teams in the country? I mean, right now you end up in a bowl that will not give you a chance to win the national championship. Might be a big bowl, might be the Orange Bowl, Fiesta Bowl, whatever. But you have no shot at the title game. Okay. And we need to have a way to, basketball, we put 68 teams in there and everybody plays everybody. If you're good enough, you'll survive. You'll be Loyola, Chicago, or whoever, Gonzaga. But if you're not going to make it, right? You'll get knocked out. So football needs to be able to, all the Division I top tier conferences, their champion of their conference has a chance to be the national championship picture. I think you can do that with the 4 teams you have now, but I don't think you need 12. I think you're watering down and ruining your product if they do that. Yeah, no,
I agree with you on that. And it's like, to me, it's like, how many games will be required to win the national championship? You're going to have to play an extra 3 games or 4
games? 3 games, and yeah.
It's like the players are already kind of, they've spent, they played 12 to 14 games already. How much more do you need to push them for this like that? And exactly what is the timetable for that?
Right.
This thing
going all January? So you're now playing from August to January, all the way through January.
Yeah.
And, and you're now going to be letting in teams that totally don't deserve to be there. And you have not improved on the original system of everybody go play their bowl game and we figure it out after. There's been no improvement on that system. The 1-game playoff, you had, the 3rd place team, they haven't lost a game. What's wrong with them? Okay, right? Then we went to 4 games. So the 5th place team hadn't lost a game. What do we do with them? So you can keep adding to that number, but that number is never going to be big enough to get in everyone who thinks they, quote, deserve to be in the playoffs. That's the wrong way to go about this. Just get rid of playoffs, right? Play your bowl games, figure it out. College football is over by January 4th. It's not hard.
I agree. I'll throw in my sports thing, which is just congratulations on the College World Series. That whole thing between Oklahoma and Florida. That's just that's an interesting thing. Florida State was ranked 10th, I think.
Yeah.
And to watch how they play their double elimination games and all this stuff, and James Madison had a nice little run in there and stuff like that. But I see these highlights and I was like, these young ladies can play.
They can play. They're very. I have some of the softball players on my basketball teams, and I go watch them play a little bit, and man, they're good. They're really good.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, no. So congratulations to all that. All right, everyone. Thank you once again for joining us. Please, as always, stay safe, stay well. Remember, we live in the greatest country in the world. Do not let anybody tell you otherwise. And God bless America. And we will see you back at our regular time and day next Wednesday. So have a great weekend. We'll see you then.